we miss something. And it's very healthy to miss something and to acknowledge that. So what are maybe some takeaways for us in all of this? We're talking about a lot of stuff. What are some things we can kind of take away? Okay. I think if you are someone who is in grief, or if you are an elder who is in grief or grieving, what should you be aware of, right? Well, I think you need to be conscious of any losses that you have experienced in the last couple of years, and maybe conscious of how you cope with loss in general, okay? Previous or historical losses. It's important to be mindful that sometimes losses are hidden, and our experience of grief is hidden. Sometimes they are hidden beneath changes, things that have changed. So sometimes change occurs, and it's not necessarily even that bad objectively, but we miss things as a result of that change. So changes in the environment, changes in appearance, things like this. This can be challenging, I think. So no more than the example of the father who could no longer drive, and that was a change. There are other things like retirement. That's a big change. Now, we expect retirement is going to be good. Sometimes it's not what we expect. And that change is difficult. And there are things that we miss about our working life. So it's important that we take the space to kind of think that through and be with that. There are all kinds of other stuff where grief can hide. Certainly, obviously, if we have lost people. If you have lost a spouse recently, a sibling, a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, sometimes a child, hopefully not, but that can be a very difficult one. Even a pet can be really challenging, and there can be awful grief and sadness underneath these things. Losses can also come from places that are not related to death, though, So sometimes the child moves further away, and that's a real loss for us. Maybe someone who helps to care for you, who can no longer care for you, they're not there. That's a loss. Sometimes a doctor retires. We experience that as a loss. A neighbor can move, Perhaps if your spouse is still with you, but they are wrestling with an illness, or some type of deterioration, and that's made it harder for you to connect with them, that's a terrible loss, isn't it? That can be a really hard one, I think. So it's important for us to acknowledge all of these. And all of these will leave us with a degree of suffering, a little bit lonely in some way, a little bit bereft, missing something. We miss something. And it's very healthy to miss something and to acknowledge that. There are other things too. We can miss a certain time in our life. We can be thinking back, to when we were 30 or when we were 40 or when we were 50. We can miss parts of that. It's important to take the space to reflect on that. We can miss certain tasks that we can't do anymore, certain independence that we had. Particularly if we're adjusting to an illness, we can miss aspects of our health that we once experienced, like being pain-free. The ability to sleep well, that's a big one. Being able to eat certain foods, being able to exercise the way that you like, being able to engage in certain hobbies that you love. We might notice that the body is changing in ways that we don't particularly like, and we might miss our old body. These are all very important to acknowledge. Now, the point in acknowledging these things is to remember that if you can't acknowledge that you're missing them, right, you won't be able to grieve effectively, and you won't be able to communicate with others about how you're really feeling, and they can't companion you as well as you need to be companioned. That's the key, all right? So there is a lot of consolation and solace to be found in expressing that grief and being met in it, but we got to be able to identify it and communicate it, right? So here we could be saying things like, I'm finding this really hard, or I'm really missing this, or we're saying things like, I'm really frustrated about this change, or I'm frustrated about that, okay? That gives the people around us a clearer picture of what we're struggling with inside, you know? And, you know, it feels better. Feels better to be met in that.